Kim Jong-un is preparing North Korea for war, and that war is going to happen sooner rather than later. That's the message delivered by 38 North, a publication from the Stimson Center that specializes in North Korean affairs, as it says that the situation in the Korean Peninsula is more dangerous now than it's been at any time since 1950. The publication goes further. Like his grandfather before in 1950, Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision to go to war. But will North Korea really start a war in 2024? To find the answer, we need to dig into what Kim Jong-un has been saying in recent months, and more tellingly what he's been doing. Let's start with the rhetoric. On January 18, 2024, the RAND Corporation, or RAND, published an article that highlighted 2023 claims by South Korea's National Intelligence Service that North Korea was likely to start using unexpected cyber and military provocations in 2024. The news was just the latest that suggests that Kim Jong-un is gearing up for conflict, and the words coming out of the leader's mouth seem to align with the theory. Take what he said at the end of 2023 as an example. During the course of 5 days of year-end meetings with his allies, Kim claimed that the United States poses various types of military threat, wrapping up on the final day of meetings by telling his military that it needs to maintain an overwhelming war response capability. As is usually the case, Kim is placing all the blame on North Korea's enemies, though his message indicates that he believes that war could break out in the Korean Peninsula at any time. While he claims an invasion would force that to happen, the greater likelihood is that he's going to be the one who starts the fight. But hold on a second. Yes, the claim that Pyongyang needs to be ready for war at any time is a serious one, but is it really much different from the claims that Kim has made before? After all, this is a man known for his constant provocations, both of the US and South Korea, and so these comments could just be more of a series of seemingly empty threats. That seems unlikely to be the case. Honing in on Kim's provocations, there's no denying that they've both grown more frequent and more dangerous over the last decade or so. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, breaks it all down into numbers. This data reveals that provocations from North Korea have increased dramatically since the presidency of George W. Bush. When Bush was in office, North Korea made an average of 3.5 provocations per year. That ramped up to 10.88 per year when Barack Obama was in office and stayed somewhat stable during Donald Trump's presidency, declining only slightly to 10.25 per year. Then Joe Biden took office and Kim Jong-un seemed to grow bolder. CSIS said the United States has recorded an average of 30.33 provocations per year since Biden was elected, around triple what they were during the previous 2 administrations, creating a total of 91 North Korean provocations during Biden's tenure in office. These provocations don't solely come in the form of rhetoric. CSIS says that North Korea has been ramping up its missile testing, with each test launch being a provocation, and many of its tests aren't related to experimental equipment. Kim is testing weapons that he already has to make sure that they're combat ready when the time comes. Something has changed in Kim's approach to war. According to DW, that change is linked to the abandonment of North Korea's approach to the United States. Over the last few years, Pyongyang has looked to normalize relationships with the US as best it could. However, according to DW, Kim may now believe that such normalization is impossible. It claims that many analysts are underestimating just how important this desire for normalization was in terms of Kim not turning his threats of war into action. With that guardrail removed, there's now very little stopping him from following through on all of the talk and actually launching an attack. We can trace this change of internal policy to 2019 and the Hanoi summit between Kim and then US President Donald Trump. At that time, the talk focused on North Korea winding down its weapons program in return for the US waiving some of the sanctions it had placed on Pyongyang. But 5 years later, that promise of fewer sanctions has not panned out, with Kim now supposedly believing that North Korea has 2 options when it comes to the US: live under the thumb of a supposed oppressor, or as DW puts it, take advantage of the supposed fact that the time is ripe for the status quo to be challenged. We can see this change of approach most clearly when we look beyond the US and check how Kim Jong-un is talking about his neighbor, South Korea. In the 2023 year-end speech that Kim gave to the North Korean people, he made several promises. Beyond outlining some of the country's military plans for 2024, he touched on inter-Korean relationships, and his tone was hostile. The conversation reports that Kim said that the relationship between the two has become a relationship between 2 hostile countries and 2 belligerents at war. The rhetoric became even more aggressive. Kim went on to say that he now believed the Republic of Korea clan to be Pyongyang's biggest enemy, calling for North Korea to continue stockpiling weapons to ensure it had the overwhelming power to defeat its southern nemesis. Forbes also has snippets of Kim's speeches in which he declares South Korea a hostile state, and most worryingly, that he would not hesitate to use nuclear weapons if, quote, the enemies ignite a war. Reuters also reported that Kim told his military that it needs to be ready to pacify the entire territory of South Korea, again mentioning the use of nuclear bombs as a response to any attack the South makes. Kim making threats to South Korea isn't anything new, but the nature of these threats, especially the reclassification of South Korea as a hostile state, is something that we've not seen before. Kim is following his normal route in propaganda terms of blaming enemies of North Korea for escalating conflict. But now he's saying that those supposed escalations will be met with force, all suggesting that he's gearing up for a war in 2024. But again, you could argue that those are just words, the ramblings of a madman whose bark is far worse than his bite. The real proof that North Korea will go to war in 2024 comes from Kim's actions rather than what he says in an attempt to ensure his oppressed people stay loyal to him and his causes. Kim's actions suggest that war is practically inevitable. For all of his posturing, giving up on the concept of reunification with South Korea means that Kim has said no to any potentially peaceful resolution of the conflict that exists between them. Instead, he's looking to claim South Korea through force, and what he's doing on the military front supports that claim. Take his new satellites and drones as an example. During the previously mentioned end-of-year speech, Kim Jong-un announced that North Korea will be launching 3 new satellites in 2024. The announcement comes in the wake of Pyongyang finally managing to get a spy satellite into space in November 2023, with that launch achieving success at the 3rd time of asking, following 2 failed launches. What this proves is that North Korea now has the technology to launch the satellites that Kim wants to build, and if he gets 3 more in orbit during 2024, Kim will have the ability to spy on South Korea and potentially the US in ways he hasn't been able to do before. The November launch was controversial enough. The US condemned it for being in brazen violation of UN resolutions intended to govern such launches, so Kim has shown that he doesn't care about following international laws and resolutions. Add to all of this Kim's promise to start building military drones. Again, Pyongyang could argue that this action is simply an attempt to achieve parity with the US and South Korea, both of which have access to drones. But when taken along with the rhetoric, remember, Kim is blaming provocation from the US and South Korea for these policies, the picture becomes clearer. Kim would have his people believe that the supposed provocations from North Korea's enemies are going to force his hand, with every move he makes from now until conflict begins merely being preparation so Pyongyang can defend itself. And there's much more. North Korea's missile tests have been intensifying over the last year, with the country also supposedly developing new types of missiles that would allow it to pose even a greater threat to its enemies. According to DW, 2023 saw Pyongyang launch a record number of missiles, a clear show of strength directed at South Korea, along with a rocket from November that put its satellite into space. Worse yet, Kim claims that one of the missiles it launched is an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile that would allow it to hit targets much further afield than any missile it used previously. ICBMs often carry nuclear warheads. Though North Korea's testing of this type of technology isn't confirmed, a successful ICBM test would mean that Kim has the missiles he needs to drop a nuke on South Korea without his army ever having to leave the North. That is a worrying prospect, and it feeds into the nuclear rhetoric that Kim's been spouting since the end of 2023. Just as worrying are the reports coming of the country's first missile test of 2024. On January 15th, CBS reported that North Korea claimed it had conducted its first successful flight test of a solid-fuel missile equipped with a hypersonic warhead. The launch was detected by both the Japanese and South Korean militaries, with the mention of a hypersonic warhead being especially troublesome. The Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation says that anything that can travel at hypersonic speeds is capable of Mach 5 or higher, at least 5 times the speed of sound. While ballistic missiles have long been capable of hitting these types of speeds, the fact that North Korea is apparently now capable of launching Mach 5 rockets is huge. After all, the faster a missile can move, the harder it is to both detect and hit it when it's in motion. Plus, faster rockets result in less time to shoot the missile out of the sky. Regardless, the missile traveled about 621 miles before landing in the East Sea, with Japan's defense ministry stating it had reached a maximum altitude of 30 miles. It's also not the first North Korean missile to splash down in the East Sea in recent times. A Hwasong-18 ICBM fired from Pyongyang did the same on December 18, 2023. All of this amounts to Kim Jong-un showing the world that North Korea has missiles that are capable of hitting South Korea. Those missiles may not have the precise capabilities that he claims. We can rarely tell between propaganda and truth when it comes to Kim's rhetoric. But Pyongyang's rockets clearly work well enough to launch satellites and reach some of Kim's most feared enemies. With capable missiles now a part of his military, Kim's able to back something up that he's offered many times in the past: his nuclear threats. Reuters reported that North Korea hasn't tested a nuclear weapon since 2017, the same year that it was able to successfully launch an ICBM. That successful test came with typical bluster from Kim Jong-un, who directed his threats at Japan by claiming that his new missiles could sink Japan into the sea. However, nothing came of these threats. That isn't because North Korea has abandoned its nuclear program. North Korea has abandoned its that Kim has likely been slowly building up his stockpile in the years that followed the successful 2017 test. It points to data from the Institute for Science and International Study, which says that Pyongyang may have had anywhere between 31 and 96 nukes in April 2023. It may have built more in the months since, and Kim hasn't been shy about his nuclear ambitions. In 2021, he claimed that North Korea had created technology that allows it to miniaturize and lighten its standard nuclear weapons, making them easier to launch, and potentially meaning Pyongyang's ICBMs could carry their nuclear payloads even further. Plus, January 2023 brought with it clear claims from Kim that he aimed to exponentially expand North Korea's nuclear arsenal, building up to it having the ability to mass-produce tactical warheads. All extremely worrying stuff. However, concern could evolve into fear when we consider the fact that nuclear terrorists on the Korean peninsula have worsened since the beginning of 2023. Back then, Kim's claims of expansion could have been seen as posturing, like so much of what he says. But the fact that he's directly mentioned that North Korea would respond to any aggression from South Korea with a nuclear strike. Every recent missile launch has been a threat of a nuclear strike. So too has every claim about the expansion and modernization of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. It all leads to a tense situation. And it's a situation that the United States may be unintentionally feeding. According to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, the U.S. is committed to using nuclear weapons in defense of South Korea should any country launch nukes against it. That was cause enough for tension on its own. You could argue that North Korea's entire nuclear program even emerged as a response to this indirect threat. And even though the U.S. would be unlikely to ever launch nukes unless it was a retaliatory strike, think of it as a self-fulfilling prophecy. North Korea is so threatened by the U.S. and its nukes that it developed nuclear weapons of its own, thus intensifying that threat. Tensions deepened even more when South Korea and the U.S. announced that they plan to cooperate to form a plan for nuclear weapons use. ICAN says that declaration came in April 2023, deepening the cooperation that already exists between the U.S. and South Korea as a part of their Indo-Pacific Trilateral Military Agreement, which also includes Japan, to cooperate militaristically. On the one hand, the agreement saw South Korea's president, Yoon Suk-yeol, reaffirm that his country wouldn't make any efforts to develop its own nuclear weapons despite international pressure to do so in the face of North Korea's threats. But it's also in this agreement that the U.S. confirmed that it would issue a swift, overwhelming, and decisive response to any nuclear launch by North Korea. Kim Jong-un likely took this as a direct threat. His increasingly aggressive rhetoric seems to suggest he did, along with his reframing of South Korea as a hostile nation, rather than one with which he aims to achieve reunification. Perhaps Kim sees the combined threat of South Korea and the U.S., with Japan backing them up, as so great that he'll have no choice but to push the nuclear button, regardless of what the U.S. claims it would do in response. There's also one little change in vernacular that could lend credence to the idea that Kim is more willing to use nuclear weapons. When Pyongyang launched its ICBM into the East Sea in December 2023, it called the test a launch drill. Every reference to similar launches in months and years prior have always been referred to as test firings. The switch to launch drill may seem minor, but it could confirm that Pyongyang has perfected its Hwasong-18 ICBM and is now ready to move into mass production rather than building individual rockets to see if they'll work. Only time will tell. But if we put it all together, the picture does not look pretty. Kim is making increasingly aggressive threats against his, quote, enemies, as well as putting his military on notice. He's made a direct reference to conducting nuclear strikes, with his missile tests proving he is likely capable of doing so. The launch of 3 new spy satellites in 2024 will enable him to conduct reconnaissance on South Korea in ways that he previously couldn't. Worse yet, there's more evidence that Kim is gearing up for something big. DW reports that U.S. satellites have recently tracked changes to a chemical production base called Manfo-Una Chemical Complex. The base, which is believed to be used to create the chemicals needed to fuel North Korea's missiles, as well as chemicals that go into its nuclear weapons, has been undergoing extensive expansion and modernization in recent years. 38 North has more news. It says that the satellite images, all of which come from commercial satellites, have shown increased activity at the plant since April 4, 2021, suggesting a ramping up of Kim's nuclear arsenal. This tallies with what Kim himself says, and with the Reuters article that claims that he may have nearly 100 nuclear weapons in his arsenal. The 38 North article goes on to say that the satellite imagery has tracked multiple instances of special rail cars moving between the Una base and North Korea's Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center, the place responsible for most of the country's nukes. Those rail cars are believed to carry chemical reagents, specifically nitric and sulfuric acid, that are used to convert, enrich, and process the materials used in nuclear bombs. In short, there's a clear link between a chemical plant that's being modernized and Pyongyang's chief nuclear research center. As for the modernization efforts, 38 North says that the facility now has 5 production plants, all stationed alongside a single specialized railway that runs through the facility and connects 2 others. Imagery captured in 2016 showed the implementation of several settling tanks for chemicals, though later images showed those tanks to be empty, raising questions about whether they're operational. However, most eyes should be focused on one of the facility's southern production plants. Made up of 2 large buildings, this plant has seen the addition of a pair of vertical storage tanks since 2018, along with consistent renovations and the building of the foundation of a new storage building, which looks likely to measure 12 by 90 meters. All of this activity tells us that the plant is up and running and that it's supplying chemicals to help the North Korean war effort. These are also not the only expansions occurring. On January 25th, 38 North also reported on the construction of a new wharf, this time at a petrochemical facility located in Nampo. That port is North Korea's largest, and it connects to the Taedong River to provide easy access to China and the rest of Southeast Asia. New storage tanks have been added, with 38 North suggesting that the work indicates that North Korea expects to start importing more petroleum, lubricants, and oils, all materials used in weapons, in the coming months. These are just 2 isolated examples of the modernization that appear to be happening in North Korea. Taken alone, they might mean little, but in the wake of Kim's nuclear threats, the expansion of the chemical plant that directly links Pyongyang's nuclear research takes on a whole new meaning. And building a new wharf in Nampo suggests that increased trade between North Korea and China is expected to take place. And that brings us to our ultimate sign that North Korea is gearing up for a war in 2024. It's strengthening its alliances. In December 2023, the South China Morning Post reported that a senior North Korean diplomat visited Beijing. The visit was notable because it was the first made to China since before the COVID-19 pandemic, with the media outlet reporting that the meeting could have been a way for China to sue North Korea as a way to put pressure on the US. That may have been the case, but it's also worth noting that the meeting could represent the defrosting of some tensions that have built between North Korea and China in recent years, especially given that China is now more open to deporting North Korean escapees. Plus, on January 25th, The Independent reported that North Korea was preparing to host a Chinese delegation led by China's vice foreign minister, again with the likely goal of strengthening bonds between Pyongyang and Beijing. An alliance like this could give Kim the confidence he needs to launch a strike against South Korea, especially if China offers its military backing. It's also not the only partnership North Korea is cultivating. On January 24th, VOA News reported that the alliance between North Korea and Russia was reaching previously unheard-of levels. It reported on Pranay Vadi, the Senior Director of Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the National Security Council, who gave a chilling speech to the Center for Strategic and International Studies on January 18th. Vadi said, "What we are seeing between Russia and North Korea is an unprecedented level of cooperation in the military sphere. VOA's reports highlight that Putin turned to Kim when he needed to replenish Moscow's weapon stockpile after the Ukraine invasion took longer than Putin anticipated. Kim obliged, and in doing so, he built a bond with Russia that goes beyond mere trade. Satellite images released in October 2023 showed about 1,000 containers shipping from North Korea to Russia, all in violation of sanctions against Moscow that likely contained weapons. The New York Times reported that North Korean artillery has started to show up in Ukraine, confirming the military alliance. Kim is helping Russia in this way because he knows he'll be able to go running to Putin when he decides to start his own war. He wants to see the situation in Ukraine resolved in Russia's favor so that he'll have another major power in his corner when he eventually decides to attack. For as much as many analysts see Kim and perhaps even North Korea as a whole a big joke, it's clear that the great successor has been gearing up for something big. He's forging alliances with the world's two strongest military powers after the United States. He has nuclear weapons and has built the missiles to launch them. North Korea is engaging in the modernization and expansion of crucial bases, and it's now able to launch spy satellites into space. All of this has been achieved amidst recent rhetoric that shows that Kim Jong-un isn't in the mood for normalization or reunification anymore. He's ready for war, and at some point in 2024 he's going to have moved all of his chess pieces into place, meaning he'll be ready to strike. Now check out North Korea's plans for offensive war, or watch this video instead.